Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Welcome, dear friends, to Kardec Radio and in your new series of health and spirituality. It's our blessed America. Of course, the world is blessed, but we want to share with you the blessed America, the thinkers, the leaders of frontier studies, research in this world. It is blessed America. 50 states in the United States, and every time we come to this program, Health and Spirituality, you're going to see the one and only the ones who are making a difference, bringing mind and body together, revolutionizing the field of medicine, the field of human knowledge about the human mind and the connection between mind and body. So today, we couldn't kickstart it in a different day because today is the day of Spiritism. You know, in Brazil, we already celebrated as the day of Spiritism. One day, the world will. Why? Because on April 18th, 1857, Allan Kardec, the scientist of the beyond, he, in Paris, France, published the Spirit's Book. 1,019 questions and answers that to date, very up to date with the human progress, it brings to us new life. And many books, much science has been developed, and little by little, everything that is said is coming to life. There's a lot to share, but just like Kardec, Dr. Gary Schwartz, the godfather of Kardec Radio, I say this because 12 years ago, on July 4th, American Independence Day, yes, he was with us in the first Kardec Radio program. And he is here to delight us with much that science is doing to understand the communication between two worlds. Is it worthwhile pursuing this? Why do we want to know about it? One thing we know, it's not about entertainment. That we know for sure. It's about ourselves. It's about all of us. So feel free to ask your questions during the program. If you are watching this on demand later, remember, you can still write your comments and we'll check them out and we will address them accordingly. For now, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Gary Schwartz. Let me say a few words about the much that he has been doing. He is professor at the College of Medicine in Tucson at the University of Arizona, and he got his PhD in psychology at Harvard University. And throughout the years, he has been professor of psychology, medicine, neurology, psychiatry, surgery. He is now the director of the Laboratory for Advances in Consciousness and Health. He also, soon after he got his PhD at Harvard, he served as a professor of psychology and psychiatry at Yale University, where he was also the director of Yale Psychophysiology Center and co-director of the Yale Behavioral Medicine Clinic. He has published more than 400 scientific papers, edited more than 11 books, academic books, and he is the author of several other books, including some that we have discussed here at Kardec Radio: The Afterlife Experiments, The Truth About Medium, the God Experiments, and the Energy Healing Experiments. I could say much more than this, but for now, he will speak for himself and share with us. So here he is, our lovely friend, our godfather at Kardec Radio. How are you, Dr. Schwartz?
I am thrilled to be here. And And I'm so happy that this is a meaningful and precious day, both for remembering Dr. Kardec, but also recognizing the unique integrative vision and role that Spiritism plays, and I suspect will be continuing to play more broadly in the years to come in human development.
Yes, and you have been working. The last conversation we had with you here last year or so, you were talking about the beginning of a new project, a project about communicating into worlds. And we want to know a little more how it is going right now.
Well, I think you're referring to what we, for the general public, refer to as the Soul Phone Project.
Yes.
A more technical term might be advanced um, electronic transcommunication
Yes.
between worlds. We have been now working on this for over a decade.
Oh,
It's
wow.
amazing how time, quote, flies. And the work has been um, extraordinary in terms of its what we've discovered about the, if you would, the, the physics of the both the non-material world and the material world, but also in terms of optimism for the future with caution about what the path appears to be.
Mm.
The In the earliest work that we did, which was published almost 11 years ago, we were using state-of-the-art technology to detect single photons of light in a pitch black environment using specially designed cooled detectors. And we were inviting, with the help of research mediums, specific individuals on the other side, who, by the way, now we refer to as PMPs, post material persons, or post material participants, to collaborate with us. And and because we're doing this research in a university, the University of Arizona, we have an added responsibility to be cautious about our claims, and also to be able to validate that if we're going to make a claim or and offer a hypothesis, that we have evidence to back it up. In fact, just a couple of years ago, I published a book with the title "Extraordinary Claims Require Extraordinary Evidence: The Science and Ethics of Truth-Seeking and Truth Abuse," which features research on the survival of consciousness hypothesis. Um, because, and by the way, Carl Sagan, the eminent, distinguished astrophysicist and also skeptic, he was one of the people who made that statement famous. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so we have been very cautious in moving ahead and
Mhm.
sharing this work. Anyway, in the beginning, we worked with single photons of light, making claims that specific beings on the other side, post-material persons, could um, increase the amount of photons that were detected inside a triple light sealed box or room.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, we found we could do that we could get highly statistically significant effects. That when they were invited to enter the chamber, we could detect increases, small but statistically significant increases in background photon activity compared to trials when they were not there. So this was the very beginning of the work, which was to show that this was possible.
Mhm.
Excuse me. It's beginning of allergy
Yeah,
season
I
in
know. Same.
Arizona. You
Yeah.
too?
Yeah, me too. That's why I'm using this,
Oh,
because my eyes are very itchy.
well, I apologize. If I'm coughing. Um,
But Dr. Schwartz, let me ask you a quick question about
sure.
that study. When the study is being peer reviewed, and of all the possibilities, how do you how did the reviewers take the interpretation that those photons were related to something that is not considered material? I mean, you know,
So
spiritual related.
that's a great question. Um, well, first of all, we published it in a scientific journal that was open to the possibility
Okay.
of survival of consciousness after death, and open to the idea that what continues is information and energy, holistic information and energy about our existence. And when you say an info energy system, that can translate into, for example, an energy body, or the constellation of all the information that describes our soul, that describes our personality. That sort of scientific language, info energy system, for that, for what, quote, survives. And the framework, and I should explain that we come from, because I come from a background in mainstream science, and I also come from a background of having been raised in an a-religious, essentially atheist home. So it was quite a transformation in my own growth and evolution to go beyond the materialist perspective that I had been trained in. And by the way, sidebar is that a few years ago, a group of us created what's called the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences, AAPS Global .com or .net. The and this is an organization of scientists from different walks of life who are all committed to the notion of that the idea that materialism, that what the only thing that's real is what we call, quote, matter, and
Mhm.
that matter creates consciousness.
Yes.
That idea, which has been challenged, as you know, from so many different areas of science, requires that we think beyond that, go
Yes.
beyond those kinds of theories. And so this group has come together, and your audience might be interested in them because they are a diverse group of people from many different perspectives, but
Yes.
all moving toward the notion of consciousness as being primary even in the universe, which of course is a, quote, old idea, and one that of course Kardec was able to express beautifully in his work.
Mhm.
Um, so the reviewers were open to the possibility, and we were also cautious in saying that although our experiments were consistent with the hypothesis that this was being generated by the the living info energy systems of the people who were no longer in the physical body. We were cautious to say that future research would need to rule out additional hypotheses before drawing a firm conclusion. So, in other words, we published it in a journal that was open to this work. Because
Yeah.
I would say, here's a rough estimate. I would say right now, 99.9% of journals in science won't even entertain the hypothesis. They'll
Yes.
label it as pseudoscience or impossible because they can't imagine the possibility that all of this and more could be true. So that was the so A, we went to a journal like that, and B, we were very cautious, and consequently, it was accepted. By the way, I should tell you
Uh-huh.
that in the second experiment, we did an experiment where the data were collected in the middle of the night when no one was physically present in the room.
Mm.
We were, in fact, all of us were physically sleeping, those of us in the physical. an advanced computer program ran the experiments in the middle of the night. All of the instructions for when to go into the light detecting chamber and leave the chamber and so on, all of it was given by PowerPoint that was automatically controlled by the computer. So the two PMPs who participated in this research, we had previously shown that they could produce effects when they were run during the day by a physical experimenter. And then what we wanted to do is to see if in the middle of the night, when the experimenter didn't know which conditions were occurring first, that in the absence of any awake experimenter, that we could produce identical results in this multi-blinded experiment. And again, we got positive results. So we were able to rule out one of the primary concerns that people ask about this research is, well, how do you know it's not your mind that's producing the results? Because if you know when you've invited a spirit to go into a chamber or invited a PMP to go into the chamber versus not, how do we know your mind wasn't producing that effect? And in science, what we do is we do controls. So in the first study, we literally had one of our experiments. We had a condition. We asked the experimenter who was skilled in meditation to try to put his mind into the chamber to see whether he could replicate what our PMP collaborators were doing. And we found that he couldn't. Or in this research, when everybody's asleep, nobody's there. We don't know when they're occurring, at what stage during the night. It was all randomized. We nonetheless were able to replicate these results over multiple sessions and also include sessions where there were no PMPs present to show that it couldn't be just some sort of consistent artifact that might be occurring through the night. So it was when you design those kinds of rigorous experiments using the best controls that we can think of, and you go to an audience that's open to the possibility, that's why it was able to be published. And by the way, they had 3 or 4 reviewers review each of the papers, and they raised many questions.
Of course.
So that's how it happened.
It's interesting. Thinking about transcommunication, I have friends in Brazil who have been dedicating their lives for it, like Sona Rinaldi, and now the closest friend is Luis Rivas. And when I talked to him, and this weekend I was talking to somebody else who was mentioning about artificial intelligence, and then I was like, the more and more we evolve into this IE developments, do you think at some point, it seems paradoxical, but do you think at some point inevitably people will find the intersection of minds of the beyond that are communicating through the instruments as people more and more are paying attention to the screens?
Yes, that's a very good question. And it is, I have sort of 2 approaches to this question. There's the general theoretical one, and then there's the practical one. The general theoretical one is yes, that in principle, if we're energy and information, and that's ultimately how things interact, and all this equipment is energy and information, even operating at the quantum level, where we are advancing technologically and making it ever more possible for if you would, tiny weak signals. I mean, when someone's a post-material person, they can't pick up a physical coaster like this.
No, not
we
directly.
know they get what?
Not directly. They need an intermediary.
Yes, they need an intermediary, or they need a technology to enable them to do this, but they can't do it directly. Okay, and so we can do that because we have a machine, a body that we can control. If a PMP were to enter a trance medium, then the PMP could use the physical body to pick up the coaster. But you don't need a physical body to operate quantum, as long as that quantum can be still processed by the physical technology. So in principle, I would have to say the answer is yes. And artificial intelligence, although its potential for abuse, as I'm sure you've been hearing, we're becoming ever more consciously aware of, particularly in the area of being able to discern truth from fiction. The On the other hand, it's also going to awaken these deeper questions that you're asking. But now I want to get to the practical side. The practical side is that most of the people historically, including people like Sonia,
Yeah.
who are very creative and very gifted in what they do, they're not trained as scientists, they're not trained as engineers, and they're not trying to build equipment that tests
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah.
any kind of hypotheses about how energy and information can be detected. And so where we and my colleagues and I are different than most people in the field is that we can take advantage of this technology plus experimental design
Mm-hmm.
and design things that are specific for the we call it PMP ergonomics. In other words, what are the things that PMPs could do to interact with the world, and then how do we design a piece of equipment that interfaces with them using state of the art knowledge in both engineering and consciousness science, and that requires some very sophisticated developments in software and hardware to be able to optimize that relationship.
But okay, so by principle, for example, at Kardec's time, he had the tables, and the table started turning. So the turning tables movement. Some people thought it was just magnetism, nature events, etc. And then he started researching, and he observed that the presence of certain people, let's say incarnates, right? They would be the key for those events to happen. So then he understood that the spirits you're calling the PMP, the spirits, the discarnates, they can only interfere if they have an interface, the human part of it. So we would call like the ectoplasm. They need that to make it manifest their action on the material, in the material world. Now, when you rule that out, like in the middle of the night, there's no person there. So then what happens? Is there a possibility that they are using some, because I know from the literature that the spirits can use the forces of nature, they can use, vital fluid, and I say these vital energies from people, from animals, from nature in itself. So in that case, how does it go?
It's a wonderful question. So let me share with you the perspective that we take. Now remember, I and my colleagues have an advantage that Kardec didn't have 150 years ago, which is we know a lot more about electromagnetic fields, quantum fields, and so on.
Right.
That's number one. And number two, we have extraordinary technology, both hardware capabilities and software capabilities, to be able to detect, for example, single photons of light in a pitch black environment. In Kardec's day, they didn't even know there was a photon, and they certainly would have known how to detect it. Okay, so I, as Isaac Newton has said, he stood on the shoulders of giants. We all stand on those who come before us, and then hopefully we take that knowledge and we take it to the next level.
Yes.
So Here is the theoretical perspective that I have, and I'll use a the simplest one in this case from astrophysics. When we look at the sky at night, and it's and we're in a, it's nighttime. Let's imagine there are no clouds, there's no moons. We can see hundreds or thousands of stars with the naked eye, and with telescopes, especially these unbelievably sensitive telescopes, the latest being the Webb telescope, we can see billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars. And all this light's been traveling for millions of billions of years in the vacuum of space, and it's all almost perfectly preserved. If that light, as it was traveling through space, was interacting with other light and other things to distort it, by the time we saw it, because it's very tiny, it would look like mush. Instead, no, we don't see mush. We see a history of starlight that literally can enable us with spectrum analysis to identify each of the personalities or the identities of the individual stars. Okay? Light has a kind of immortality. Long after the star has, quote, died, that energy and information, because remember, it's informed energy. It's not just random energy. It's informed, it's patterned, and it's dynamical. We on this planet can see it. So far, so good. Mm-hmm. Now, so light is a kind of immortality. And what is light? It's immaterial. It has no mass. It's infinitely small. All this stuff. Light. It's a wonderful mystery. Now, if we have, imagine we're now in a football field, or in a field, just any kind of a field, and we have 100,000 people, all looking, for example, at the Big Dipper, and that's a bunch of stars that look like a dipper, which includes the North Star. And if all of us look at that Big Dipper, and we have good eyes, and there's 100,000 people there, how many people will see the Big Dipper? 100,000 people. Now, the Big Dipper is gigantic in terms of where it was in space and where it is still in space, or it meaning these 7 stars, whatever. But our eyes are only this tiny.
Yes.
So that means that there are at least 100,000 teeny little Big Dippers entering our eyes. And by the way, it's entering both of our eyes. So if there's 100,000 people and everybody has good eyes, there are at least 200,000 simultaneously exact Big Dippers, but it's really tiny. Now that begins to sound like, well, there's only one Big Dipper in the sky, and yet there's 200,000, then there could be 200 million. How many little dippers are there? Well, there's probably an infinite number. And so consequently, you start thinking about the micro and the macro, the all and the small, the as above, so below, and so on, but it also now in scale. Now, the question is, are we any different than a star? And well, obviously we are in terms of the fact that we're much physically smaller, and we're not. Our temperature is not 1 billion degrees Fahrenheit at the surface of our skin and stuff. But we are still both emitting and reflecting photons of light, and light that is, of course, not visible, like infrared and ultraviolet and so on. These little patterns of energy information, each of us walking on the Earth, that goes out into space too. And how do we know that it goes out into space now? Well, not just theoretically, because we have spy satellites that are out there that can literally track us, not just see the patterns of each of us individually, but also track our infrared, track our ultraviolet, and the whole package. Our electromagnetic fields, photons, are going out into space too. And once they go out into space, they continue just like the light from distant stars. So what we know from a biophysical point of view is that our physical histories, our physical histories, think about this, our physical histories continue long after our bodies are, quote, have died, just like our physical histories of the sun or stars continue long after the stars have died, because we're seeing a history of starlight. So you take all of this information that I've just now described to you and said, well, okay, so what that means is we haven't lost all of this energy and information. It's just that now it's much weaker than it was. The same way that the starlight is teeny in its energy compared to a single sun, our energy is tiny compared to our original energy. However, it's there, it's real, it has all the properties of electromagnetic signals, it's got all of our form and everything else. And that's why mediums, for example, can, when they can see spirit, and when they see spirit in three-dimensional space, not just in their mind's eye, but those unique individuals who can see in three-dimensional space, they literally see a person in their form. They recognize the facial feature. They recognize the hair. Often people come dressed to a session, they come dressed wearing clothing that they historically wore and so on. And why is that they're able to do that? The reason that they're able to do that is because all that energy and information is there in the vacuum of space. So if they come to the lab or they come to the to our home, it doesn't, wherever they are, or to a medium's office, and they appear intentionally in with all that form, then theoretically they're going to have all the same, we call them physical like properties of what they had when they were here in the physical. They will have physical like properties, except what? They're just very weak. And it takes a special consciousness with special sensitivity to be able to, for example, see the light reflected off their body, for example, that you and I normally can't see. They're invisible to us, but they're not invisible to everyone. So when you have that understanding, and now you make technology that is ultra sensitive, and if you can filter out all the noise around it, you then make it possible to see the living info energy historical systems that continue after we, quote, die.
Yeah.
So that's the theory that we draw from. And that has led us to make ever more progress in building a hopefully someday practical technology that will be a real communication device.
Okay. Fantastic. It makes so much sense. I myself, as a medium, no matter what people say, I remember this homeopathic doctor in Brazil when I was like a teenager. I was talking to her and I mentioned quite normally, very naturally, I was raised in a spiritist family. I say, when the spirits talk to me, and she's like, Vanessa, you're schizophrenic. And I said, I'm very functional, so you can't categorize me as such. So today she understands it and she tells my mom, Vanessa was right. And I said, when you see and you feel, but the implications, Dr. Schwartz, for us who are talking here, we know that there are implications for such, right? We're talking about health.
Yes.
Our very health, the interaction of these realms, this multidimensional life that we live, let's say this way, it can create health or disease. And sometimes there are illnesses that people go to the office and nobody understands what's going on. They go to a spiritist center like ours, and we detect the presence of these entities that are interfering with the energy fields of the person. And after healing treatments, they get better. So I would like you to talk about the importance and the implications of such experiments that you're doing.
Okay. Let's imagine for the moment that, It's sometime in the future. It could be 3 to 5 years from now. It could be 30 to 50 years from now. But we move from proof of concept, which we've already reached, to, or proof of principle, to what we call proof of practical. In other words, we have now a technology where instead of it taking 5 to 10 minutes to detect a single yes response, we can detect a single yes response in 5 to 10 seconds. So all of a sudden, you could create what we call the soul switch, and that would then enable us to create a soul keyboard. Okay. And once you have a soul keyboard, then we can have soul texting. And once we have soul texting, then texting is going to dramatically increase once people have access to this.
Social media is overwhelming. I cannot tell about that one.
Okay. So anyway, let's imagine for the moment that this was to happen. How could this change our lives, both in terms of positive and negative? And so it's in that broad context that I want to go back to healing as we currently do it, and then how the soul phone could enhance that. In other words, where we have more direct information. I mean, you were trained as a medium. You have the gift, and you're obviously science minded, and so on. But it's probably easier for you to talk to me using contemporary technology than to try to do it psychically. Even though you might be able to do it psychically, it's a lot easier when we're in physical form to do it this way. So, one of the notions, let's take the one that you just raised. Can positive spirits help heal us? And can negative spirits potentially hurt us? Okay. Now, in spiritism, you sort of accept as a given that assistance, what I call it spirit assisted healing or spirit assisted living, that spirit can either help us, PMPs, the right PMPs, can either help us recover from an illness or contribute to our treatment, or they can literally, if they're malevolent, they can potentially contribute to both emotional and even physical disease. That is a belief that you hold, right? And there's a lot of data that are consistent with that hypothesis. Now, my hunch is that of the many reasons why the biomedical community doesn't want that to be taken seriously, of the many reasons, which includes financial and economic, is the fact that although the positive side of thinking that there are really help, we could really receive help, and not just in our physical health and emotional health, but even in living, in guidance, that we could receive help from positive post-material persons and even higher realms, even the angel what I call the angel hypothesis. That all of that and more, part of the reason I think people are afraid to embrace it, is because then they say, well, gee, if the positive is there, then the negative could also be there as well. And they're frightened about the negative spirits. They're frightened about the loss of privacy. They're frightened about many things. And as you know, Hollywood capitalizes on that in all of the movies and so on. So as long as there is excessive fear, and to the extent that that fear might be justified without appropriate protections, either consciously or unconsciously, a large segment of the population is going to not want to think about it. And yet, if we ever get to a soul phone technology, spirit communication technology, we will then have, quote, definitive proof. It'll be very easy now to establish that there is a greater reality. And so, whether we're frightened of it or not, we're going to have to face it as a species and grow accordingly. And that's part of the reason why what you have been doing and your colleagues have been doing in Spiritism is so vitally important that it continue. And partly because its roots was driven by a person, who took the name Kardec when he wrote to to put the bridging of between science and spirituality together, and then you and the contemporary you have preserved that, honor it, celebrate it, um, and and gently but firmly uh, allow it to take seed and grow. Um, and to the extent that I can play some small role in contributing to that um, bigger vision, I consider it, a gift that I have the opportunity to contribute to this. I
Yes.
mean, it's funny, in preparation for the interview, I decided I should look back and see how Cardiac Radio is doing. I haven't been to your website in a few years, and therefore I had the excuse to go back and read about Cardiac and reread your principles. The mission and the philosophy and the principles. And you know what my problem is?
Yeah.
My problem is I agree with all of it, and I love it. I admire it.
It's good that you say this because you're an expert in the human mind. And Kardec, when he really realized that there is more than the eyes can see, he couldn't help it but to say the implications are such that we have to change the way we live. Don't you think that's one of the reasons why people are hesitating to give in as well? And science to change its paradigm, because science depends on the humans who are behind it. And we're hesitating to change ourselves as well. We love changes, but not our personal
May
change.
I ask you a question?
Yes.
Um, I don't know if I was ever brave enough to ask you this question before, but it might be timely. Um, do you or any of the mediums that you know here or in Brazil or anywhere, are any of you in contact with Kardec?
I would say the maximum that I could see was have a vision of him in his office in some other sphere. I know he is in touch with all of us. He has a huge team, and we receive messages through other spirits.
Through
But
other spirits, but not directly through him.
but after he discarnated in 1869, it took 20 years for a medium in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, to receive a direct message from him. So we have published this message in the previous issue of the Spiritist magazine, which people can go to the website spiritistmagazine.com, but I can send it to you. And
Please.
yes, so, and of course, lately in our movement, there's this conversation about the fact that it was said that he would reincarnate to complete the work. So some people think that Chico Xavier, the medium, was the continuation of it all. I don't know, I cannot tell, but I have friends, even Dr. Marlene Nobry, whom you remember. She was a great advocate for this idea that Chico Xavier is the reincarnation of Kardec. I don't know, and I tell people, look, whether he was or not, we know that the works have advanced greatly through his almost 500 books.
Right.
But it's from a different angle. First, Kardec was the researcher, he was not the medium per se. And then later, as the medium and the person who actually walked the talk, because there are ethical, moral implications of it all. It's not only about, yeah, the spiritual world exists, but we're going to keep hating. We're going to keep feeling envy and jealousy, it transforms ourselves completely, our goals in life, our relationships. And I think this is the key notion that probably people are hesitant to give in, don't you think?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the awareness of a greater reality, the and the documentation of the continued quote thinning of the veil
Yes.
has the potential to awaken people to the realization that the that there's meaning and purpose in life, that their accountability and the consequences of their actions are far greater than just how they live their lives now. That when you have the wrong model of the way things are, you end up making choices which can which hurts everyone, including yourself. And that transforming the framework inspires the and it awakens, it inspires, awakens, releases our natural capacity for empathy, for caring, for compassion, for generosity, for humility, for caring about wanting to be in service to others and the greater good, and virtually every positive quality that we attribute to human beings can potentially flow and is released.
Hmm.
It's awakened. It's enabled, um, and we may be, it may be that we're entering a time where this awakening is needs to occur in an accelerated pace
Yeah.
because of the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
And it can fundamentally change our lives. I remember when you mentioned that if we pay attention to, for example, Andrea Lewis' books, the phenomenal book, Evolution into Worlds. As a neuroscientist, when I read chapter 9, a book that was written in 1958, it talks about the renewal of cells at a time in which neuroscience would say no. It doesn't keep growing more and more and more. And everything that it says and explains how we have evolved to the brain that we have nowadays as humans. I remember you said, if we pay attention to this, we can expedite the advancements of science, right?
Exactly.
Thus, the importance of pursuing it as well.
Yes. One of the things that I was again struck with when I revisited, and so the latest way in which you expressed the mission and so on, is that you mentioned, you used the words, the letters God above virtually everything else that was discussed.
Yeah.
Um, and this fundamental belief in a supreme intelligence, supreme being, infinite mind, infinite love, whatever set of terms people feel comfortable in using. And as you know, particularly in contemporary science, the the G word is taboo. I mean,
Oh,
spirit and soul is taboo enough, but
yes.
the G word is sort of the probably the ultimate challenge and concern for science, and part of it is justified because earlier forms of religious institutions wouldn't allow for human knowledge to grow. Okay, um, the the notion that we have the capability for not only communicating as mediums with the deceased loved ones or people in spirit or saints
Hmm.
or even angels. As you know, there are people who believe A, that they can pray directly to God, and B, that they can connect with God.
Yes.
Um, And if you want to evoke the fear that in the label of schizophrenia, all you have to do is evoke the idea that somebody, not only that somebody is quote asking things of God, but they're getting messages in return. Okay, that is considered the ultimate example of psychosis. But what if yes, there are some people who are psychotic who think that they're hearing voices and they're not, but they haven't. But there are many other people who are actually getting accurate information, degrees of accurate information from a universal source, and that contemporary science would predict that based on everything we know from system science through quantum holograms and on and on. All of this points in this direction. So I'm leading to a point here, and that is maybe it is time that we think about creating a new interdisciplinary field where
Mm.
we bring spirit and God back into science. And I had the privilege to be a graduate student and then on the faculties of helping to facilitate the creation of multiple interdisciplinary fields. The first one that I had the privilege to work with was what we called social psychophysiology, the bridging of social factors, psychological factors, and physiological factors. Bridging social psychology, which is itself interdisciplinary, so social factors with psychology, and psychophysiology, which is mind and body. So you have social psychophysiology.
Yes.
Or in the biomedical frame, and that's top down, social psychophysiology. Bottom up is what was emerging in psychosomatic medicine in its day, which was the biopsychosocial model. So you
Yes.
can either go top down or bottom up. Okay. And there have been many other interdisciplinary fields. I was involved with the formation of behavioral medicine,
Yeah.
which bridges many different fields of basic science and applied science, or health psychology, which is a special subset within um, psychology. And then we have psychoneuroimmunology and psychoneuroendocrinology, and the notion of these bridging. So I have been thinking that maybe at the ripe young age of 79, that maybe it's, quote, both time and, quote, safe to now stand up for bringing science, contemporary science, and the God hypothesis together. And we're currently,
Mhm.
two of my colleagues and I are writing a paper on creating a field, calling for the creation of a field which is not pronounceable. I mean, it is, it just takes a little work,
Yeah.
called theopsychobiophysics.
Oh, wow.
Theopsychobiophysics, which essentially addresses the role of doing research showing how through connecting with the divine, the mind with the divine connection can improve both the biological and physical functioning and health.
Oh,
So
wow.
you're overtly putting and theo at the top, as opposed to making it more pronounceable, like biophysical theopsychology or something. There are other ways to say it, but by calling it theopsychobiophysics, it always reminds you we need to add God into mainstream science and education. And we're holding a conference at Santa Clara University. My colleague is the name is Dr. Thomas Plant, Professor Thomas Plant, um, is as organizing this conference. I'm a co-organizer. Um, um, I think something 18th or 19th of May, both there and at Stanford. And the title is called Faith Seeking Understanding. I think that's exactly what we called it. Um, but the theme is on building bridges between science and religion more broadly, spirituality and religion more broadly, to try to open the dialogue to bring all this together. And the and the and that and we published a book, an edited academic book last year called Human Interactions with the Divine, the Sacred, and the Departed, plant in Schwartz, which looks at this from a more an academic point of view. It's not light or friendly reading by any stretch of the imagination, but it is. It was meant to awaken academics to these kinds of bridges. And what's of course beautiful is that Spiritism is living it
Yeah.
as you practice this. And what I'm going to do, as partly because of the time and coincidence of being with you today, is I'm going to make sure that I can share a little bit of this conversation and your questions
That's
and
wonderful.
illustrate how this applies more cross culturally.
That's wow. I am wowed by it. It's beautiful just to see like how you are at the vanguard of humanity's progress, bringing health to humanity. Because I see patients as well as psychologists, and the trickiest thing is to help them without God. And I say, self esteem without God, it's almost impossible. So I think it's fantastic that you're making this revolutionary effort to really bring it back. Because if people they have their belief, they can't heal without relying on it. And if medicine does not have a conversation with it, we're going to be struggling. No wonder we are, right?
Yes.
So, Dr. Schwartz, we could talk to you forever, but I know time has come up. Would like to ask you for, though you made a phenomenal, you shared phenomenal information, if you could finalize with a comment regarding the like hopes for humanity that this will come true one day.
Despite all of the challenges, and we certainly experience in American society, you're talking about the blessed America. And in many ways, America is blessed. But America is, if you would, a microcosm of the macrocosm of the extreme problems that humanity is facing at this particular moment in history, at virtually every level. And and if anything challenges this, it's our failure to appreciate and celebrate the fact that we've been given the gift to be able to discover, understand, and live a truth focused life, um, if we choose to do so. And we've been given and I understand, choice. It's as if the divine is saying, yes, you know, I could have designed you so that lying was impossible. I could have designed you that if you became overly aggressive, you would fall asleep, or any number of short things to short circuit, our 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 weaknesses. We've been given choice, and despite all of these challenges, this work, the work of the bringing back, the resurrecting the connection between recognize the existence of a greater reality on the one hand, and our connection to it never being apart from it, except in our minds, um, and the opportunity of choosing the to enable the our goodness side, from being expressed. It's hard not to have hope when you see the fact, when you can appreciate the greater reality and realize that, quote, they are rooting for us. They are here to, quote, help us. And although it is painful as part of our evolution, it's there. It's ours to receive if we wish to receive it. And it's hard to it's hard to resist goodness once you have the opportunity to um, experience it. And there is no more beautiful experience than to be in harmony and service with universal love and universal caring and so on. And each of us can do so in our own ways. Um, and the and you, Vanessa, and your team and Cardiac Radio are like, for me, I quote, a shot in the arm. It's like it's a this healthy jolt of. It's hard not to be optimistic and seeing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schwartz. You are such a blessing for all of us, not only in the United States, but the world. We admire you very much for the persistence and determination in groundbreaking research over decades. And we know that there is more to come, and we'll be here keeping an eye and waiting for you to come back. And we want to thank you again and again for making the time to be here with us today in such a special day, April 18th. It's Kardec's Day, it's Spiritist Day, and for bringing confirmation that there is much more for humanity. Let's keep our hopes up. So thank you so much for everything. You are Kardec's Radio Godfather. I can't repeat it enough. Thank you. A big hug to you.
Thank you and bless you.
Thank you. We hope to see you soon again. So, dear friends, we want to thank you for joining us. This is the beginning of a new series in health and spirituality. Blessed America. The pandemic is over somewhat, and a new beginning for us. And in this new beginning, we need to meditate. Why are we here for? And what are we here for? Make your comments, ask your questions, participate, share, subscribe to Kardec Radio's channels, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And if you want to help us, don't forget, we're all volunteer based. We would love to have your help as well because the work has been increasing immensely. For now, we wish you many blessings and we hope to see you again very soon in another Blessed America.